All right. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to our special meeting tonight, Tuesday, December 10th, 2024. We're here to meet on further budget discussions. Short agenda, long discussion, I expect. So we'll go ahead and call the meeting to order, and I'll start off with the roll call. Councilmember Van Orman. Here. Councilmember Kurtz.
Present.
Councilmember Ball. Sorry, I was looking at something else.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Cargill.
Present.
Councilmember Spencer.
Present.
Councilmember Dunn.
Happy to be here.
Councilmember Kennedy.
Present.
All right, all present and accounted for. City Administrator McAvoy will be running a little bit late. He's over at the library finishing up the class on contacting your legislature and advocating for our city as a citizen. So I'm looking forward to hearing about that, hopefully at the next meeting. So we are looking for agenda approval.
Mayor will make a motion to approve the agenda as printed.
Okay, do we have a second?
Second.
Second from Councilmember Spencer. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? All right, motion passes 7-0. So we have city administrator report, but Mark's not here yet.
We may have to jumble that a little bit.
Or do you have it, Kelsey?
Mark had just asked that I acknowledged a couple of the budget citizen comments under
Okay.
his city administrator report. And
Okay.
so I'll just note that we received comments on the 2025 budget from Tom Sahlberg, Shelley Smith, and Jim Baumker.
Okay, great. And everybody got copies of those? Okay, perfect. And he didn't have anything else on his report? That was it? Oh, well, thank you.
There we go.
You look quite a bit different tonight. All right, so we will move on to our workshop 2025 budget review. And again, I apologize for not being here last week. Thank you, Kyle, for taking all the notes, and I'm going to kind of turn it over to you to
Yeah.
based on what we've got here, and I think you probably got some slides as well.
Yeah, so while Evan pulls that up, what you're going to see on the screen is really just a visual for those online, because that's what we have in front of us, Mayor and Council, for discussion tonight. So I did want to take a little bit of time to review the discussion that we had last Tuesday, review the amendments that were approved, and obviously we'll go through one by one the proposed amendments that were tabled, some of the impacts they'll have on the budget, and then open the floor for discussion. So last Tuesday, the first amendment that we wanted to kind of draw everybody's attention to was that there was consensus amongst council to create an interfund transfer between the general fund to the Trailhead Improvements Fund of $500,000 for a prepayment of that bond. And so that did pass. And so that impact is on the first two tables you'll see below. You'll see our resources. That's our ending fund balance proposed for 2025 of 4.7. You'll see two rows below that, Trailhead bond prepayment transfer. And then we'll get into the police department budget a little bit later. But that next table down there shows that we are now planning to prepay the Trailhead bond $943,953. And so on the second approved amendment, you see that reflected in that first table as well.
Kyle,
There was-
sorry, can I
yeah.
ask you to go back? We're really not prepaying 943. We're paying our 443, which is the normal payment,
Right.
and prepaying the 500.
Correct. Sorry.
So
I
yes, we need
misspoke.
to make sure
Yeah,
that that's
apologies.
clear.
So,
Thank you.
yep. And then there was consensus amongst council to increase the police department budget to an even $6 million, which was an increase of expenses of $354,398. That is also reflected in the first table that you see below. That, with that first $500,000 transfer, brings our amended general fund ending balance for 2025 to $3.9 million. We reviewed enough. I don't want to get too far into amendments 3 and 4. Those were more the smaller procedural line items. The last approved amendment was removing budgeted revenues for the Commerce Grant and donations from the Library Capital Fund totaling $1.437 million. And that is reflected on the fourth table you see on this first page. And so the proposed budget, the initial proposed budget included resources totaling $5.7 million. And so we have now accounted for the reduction of the Commerce Grant and the donations in our budgeted revenues that now brings our total resources down to $4.29 million for library capital. And so on the heels of our discussion on the proposed amendment tonight, there will be a discussion and some consensus that needs to happen amongst council on how we account for what is now budgeted expenses of 5.7 million and budgeted revenues of 4.29 million. So there's one of two things can happen. We can create an additional interfund transfer or increase the transfer from general fund to match that 5.7, or we can reduce budgeted expenses in library capital to meet what are now the approved resources for that fund, which would be 4.29. Are there any questions on what was approved last Tuesday before we do a quick review of the proposed amendments?
Mayor Pro Tem.
Not a question, just again, a confirmation that this is more of a comment, that the 1.4 million-ish that comes from the Commerce Grant and the budgeted revenues for donations, we're not wiping those out. We're simply saying that we're not going to budget for them. If we get them, great, we add them in. But we're not saying that it's not going to happen. We're just being more cautious and saying that those are numbers that we don't know for sure we're going to get, so we're not budgeting for them. If we get them, great, they go right back into that fund.
Correct. And so to balance the budget, to get an adoptable budget, we would then potentially reduce budgeted expenses in library capital fund. And then once those revenues are realized, we would present a budget amendment back to council at that time.
Thank you.
Right, any other questions? Councilmember Ball.
I don't even know if this is possible, but is it possible that I could make a motion to reinstate that $937,000 grant and the donation of 500,000 back to the budget?
Are we at that point, or are you just doing a summary right now? Sorry,
I know.
Yeah.
Procedurally.
I'm certainly not in a position to lead the meeting, but I don't.
Well, I want to make sure we get through your summaries.
Sure.
Before we start taking motions for additional changes. So I'm going to let you tell me
Okay.
when you're done with your summaries, so then we can
Right.
still hold your question.
I just didn't. know if
Ideally,
any
yeah, so-
Time is appropriate.
I think to that point, I think it would be beneficial to get through the entire review and then we
Okay.
can start kind of
All
down
right.
that road
Thank you,
if that's acceptable to
Thanks,
council.
Preston.
So.
Any other questions before Kyle moves on? Councilmember Van Orman.
Kyle, we usually have 3 to 4 months of operating budget at the end of the year, just to get us by until property taxes come in. Does this cover that, what we're looking at?
So there is a good rule of thumb in the state, in the city's maturity right now, that we have a little over $1 million of operating expenses a month. And so what we can see as an amended general fund ending balance as it currently sits of 3.9 million, that'll get us a little over 3 months of operating expense.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, Mayor Pro Tem.
Just real quick, Kyle, we've talked about this many times before, and I want to make sure that it's good in this case as well. The 3.9 as the ending fund balance, what is that as a percentage of the total budget?
So that would be a little over 10%.
And we're statutorily supposed to have 15.
So operating revenues of 15%. So it's a little bit different on how we account for that.
Okay, I'm just, I'm
yes.
trying to follow.
Correct. Yes, yes.
Everybody's question. So we're still within our statutory requirements of what we have to have in operating reserves and our restricted reserve.
Yes, yes, we are. And the operating reserves is the city shall strive to. So it's open, but that's the goal that we try to hit.
But I thought that was 15%.
Yes,
And you're
it
saying
is.
it's
Correct.
10, you're saying we're at 10.
We're a little over 10. Yeah,
So that's concerning.
correct. So.
All right. Any other questions? Okay, go ahead, Kyle.
Right. So with that, let's flip to the next slide, please, Evan. And so proposed amendments 1 and 2 are linked. And so it is an either or neither scenario for these. And I'd like to go through amendment number 1 first. This was initially proposed by Mayor Pro Tem Cargill Amendment number 2 was then the amendment by Councilmember Spencer. And so amendment number 1 has to do with the transfer in Fund 310 REIT. Currently, the current proposed budget calls for a $1.5 million transfer from 310 REIT to Fund 330 Library Capital to go towards the improvements. And so the amendment was to reduce that from 1.5 to 1 million. And that 500,000 would then be applied to an additional transfer to the Trailhead Improvements Fund. And that would then take that amount from 400 to $900,000. So there is a net zero impact on 310 REIT with this amendment. The impact falls with our ending resources for library capital being reduced from 4.3 million to 3.8 million, and resources for the Trailhead Improvements Fund bond prepayment. So we are increasing that total payment, minimum and prepayment, to 1.4 million. That was then amended to essentially increase that from that proposed 900,000 to 1.4 million. So then the impact on library capital for amendment number 2 is unchanged, but we are adding an additional 500,000 to the Trailhead Improvements Fund prepayment, bringing that total payment to 1.9 million. And so that does have a $500,000 impact to ending fund balance for REIT.
And I'm assuming we'll get to this later, but we're going to be looking at what this would have an impact on all the other capital facilities plan projects.
So it's anecdotal. We have roughly $26 million in identified improvements over the next 6 years. And we have potentially $12 million over that time span to apply towards those. And so we have this fairly large delta. The capital facilities plan changes every year. So for us to cast that wide of a net 6 years out is presumptuous, but we have this fairly large delta in planned resources versus planned expenses in the capital facilities plan.
Okay, thank you. Mayor Pro Tem.
Kyle, real quickly on, I hate to keep bouncing back and forth here, but I have a follow-up question on the ending fund balance.
On page 1.
Yeah, page
Okay.
1, sorry. You had mentioned that this is going to take us down to 3.907. I'm looking at this one that you sent out a couple weeks ago or a couple months ago that had us at 3.979 under the budget that was proposed. So I'm trying to figure out how that change, or I mean, that's essentially the same number. It's off by about 70,000. So what is the different? What am I missing here?
So we have probably 7 to 10 different iterations of that forecast every single year.
Right.
And so there was assumptions in that are not included in the proposed budget that is on page 167 in our budget. And so we would have to have an offline discussion on what is included in that or not versus what is included and not in the proposed budget in our binder.
Okay.
And there's a potential, so that might have, does that have streets included as well? At the top, it should have just general fund or general fund and streets.
It looks like it's just general.
Okay,
And library capital's in here too.
okay.
And it's essentially the same, again, it's like a $70,000 difference between this one, which was the projected ending fund balance based on the budget as proposed versus what's on here right now.
So yeah, the exact details of that would escape me, but I could certainly pinpoint those for you
Okay.
once I go through it.
Okay, sorry, I didn't mean to
Yeah.
take us back to that one.
Councilmember Dunn.
Are you gonna go on with more detail regarding proposed amendment 2? Are you concluded?
So I have concluded, but we can certainly field any
to reflect
questions.
on, your synopsis of the approved amendments, and its ending fund balance at 3.9. Could you describe what the ending fund balances would be if amendments 1 and 2 were to be approved?
Yeah, so ending fund balance for amendment number 1 would be unchanged for real estate excise tax because we're taking 500,000 of the 1.5 to library capital and applying that to Trailhead. So there's a net zero effect on the ending balance for amendment number 1. Amendment number 2, there is a net negative $500,000 effect on the ending fund balance for REIT because we are applying an additional full $1 million towards a prepayment of Trailhead.
Yeah, to be clear, that's the REIT ending
Correct,
fund balance,
yes.
not the general
Right.
fund ending balance. Any more questions on these two? Not seeing any. Kyle, go ahead.
Great. So next slide, please, Evan. So amendment number 3 has to do, really revolves around some information that we did include in the proposed budget regarding 2 funds that are rather dormant. And the first one is the Community Messaging Fund, and the second is the Building Contingency Fund. Both of these funds that have relatively substantial amounts. So we have $109,500 for community messaging, and we currently have $134,000 for building contingency. And so there was a proposal, nothing concrete, but there was a proposal of looking at these to see if we could draw these down partially or totally and apply these towards the library capital fund or some other identifiable use for these funds. And so the proposed amendment was to transfer all or part of both of these funds to Fund 330 Library Capital. And we have 2 scenarios that you can see in front of you. The first table assumes that amendments 1 or 2 are not included. The second table assumes that they are, and that has a net $500,000 impact on the total ending resources for library capital.
That is a. amendment
Go
two.
ahead, Councilmember Kennedy.
Amendment 2 is approved.
Yeah, so the first table is if it is not approved, the second table if it is approved.
Thank you.
If you guys can please get closer to your mics and wait to be recognized, I would appreciate it. Okay, any questions on approved amendment, proposed amendment 3? Okay, not seeing any.
The last one was just on the heels of our discussion last Tuesday regarding the Arboretum improvements that are currently on the unfunded projects list in the proposed budget. And so the proposal was to include $600,000 for Arboretum improvements and to be taken from general fund ending balance. And so that this table below identifies our amended ending fund balance of 3.9, accounting for the $600,000 reduction, bringing our total, if this amendment is approved, to 3.3 million.
And then that would take us down to what percent?
Probably right at 10.
Okay. All right, so we've got our review of the amendments.
And really, that was all we had planned for. And so I think we open the floor to discussion. If there's anybody that wishes to start with a motion on one or any of these.
Yeah, so before, I guess, to avoid, I understand there's a bit of confusion with all kinds of motions and changes and stuff last meeting. So my suggestion would be to start with discussion before we have any motions. Taking amendments 1 and 2 together for discussion purposes. And then once we're done with that, then we'll take a motion. If that sounds agreeable to everybody. That way we don't get mired up in a whole bunch of changes and amendments to motions and whatnot. So I'll go ahead and open the floor to discussion on amendments 1 and 2 for that purpose. Who would like to? Gotta be something. Mayor Pro Tem, yep.
So as Kyle mentioned, proposed amendment number 1 was the one that I made. Proposed amendment number 2 was the one that Councilmember Spencer made. I think amendment number 2 is better for a couple of reasons. One, because it gets us down to, my math is correct here, and Kyle, correct me if I'm wrong. It gets us down to about 4 million in terms of what's left on the trailhead bond.
Correct.
Little over 4.
Yeah.
It also gets us up to, as you mentioned, Kyle, about 4 million on the library capital fund. And again, keep in mind, that's an asterisk. If we get the grant and if we get the donations, which we're hoping, that would be back up to 5.5-ish, 5.4.
I think it's right at 5.2 and it leaves us a delta of about 500,000.
So it was
937
990.
plus 500. So that's about 1.4, a little over 1.4.
So about 5.3, 5.4,
Okay.
somewhere in there.
Sure.
So, I mean, basically, as you say, that's a delta of about 400, 500,000 on what we're gonna do with the library, which we're still discussing, which we're still trying to figure out. So I think we're able to kill two birds with one stone here by having a good amount set aside for the library as we continue those discussions. I know Councilmember Van Orman previously proposed, excuse me, having a $2 million sinking fund for the library for next year. This would basically be double that, plus anything that we would get in the donations and the grants. And then it also helps save us a pretty good chunk of cash when it comes to the trailhead facility. And again, my math, and this is just ballpark, but my math on the $500 increment or $500,000 increments, Kyle, was about 200,000 in savings just by breaking those $500,000 chunks up. And then the 2.8 you said we would save in interest if we paid the whole thing off.
Right. If we prepaid the entire thing, we've already paid some interest.
Right,
So we
right.
wouldn't save all of that. So if we applied a $1.5 million prepayment in 2025, we would save, and this is coincidental, the amount, but we would save $150,000 next year on the life for interest. That's a graduated process as well. And then
Right.
each prepayment, you save a little bit more on interest. Our prepayment penalty would be $30,000.
So it'd be a net gain. What did you say was the first number?
150,000.
150. So a net gain of $120,000 by making those payments.
Correct.
Okay. So that is why I think that's the best way to go. It sets us in place our payment on Trailhead. It pays down some of the city's debt. It saves the taxpayers money. It gets us a good chunk going forward for the library as we try to figure out what we're going to do, either with the current building or with something else at Town Square. And I think it's just the responsible way forward. So I would speak in favor of the proposed amendment number 2.
Okay, thank you. Next comments. I'm looking for. Anybody else? Councilmember Dunn, thank you.
I wanted to review the currently approved amendments with their 10% approximate of total budget threshold versus statutory obligation or safety position at 15%. Could you kind of reiterate that?
Right. So that gives us about, I would say 12%, 11 to 12. Our target is 15. And so yeah, that doesn't hit the mark.
So to be clear, with the currently approved amendments, we are underfunded truly for the first 3 months of the year.
Our position is skinny for sure. And so I had a little note about maintaining healthy and ending fund balances. A million different scenarios can play out, and they do with the adopted budget that we have. Having that cushion is important to weather the months that we don't have any property tax income. That balance will get drawn down, and then we do get replenished come April, May, June. And so getting that thin is a position that's foreign to me. And so that's a little bit outside of the norm to run that thin with an ending fund balance in general fund.
So I'm grateful for your opinion, specifically that it's a position that you don't feel comfortable with as a finance director. I cannot support any additional amendments that would further decrease these ending fund balances.
Can I just ask a quick follow-up to that?
Yeah, and then I've got a quick reply. Go ahead.
But you're talking about general fund. You're not talking about the REIT ending fund balance. Which is
Yeah.
proposed, which is specifically what we're talking about with proposed amendment 1 and 2.
Yeah, it's to that point, I probably convoluted the point a little bit. It is ending fund balances in general as it relates to, we have operating costs in REIT as well.
Right.
I'm not necessarily concerned about that because those are pretty minimal in the grand scheme. But 1.1 as an ending fund balance in REIT, we've had that before. That has happened before. We are a growing city with, again, $26 million in proposed projects, and with REIT carrying a heavy burden on that. And so we would have to find other potential revenue sources to fund a lot of these projects if we do intend to prepay the Trailhead Bond.
Just to, real quick, to clarify, I believe, so correct me if I'm wrong, Councilmember Dunn, I believe your question was actually back on the approved amendments on page 1, drawing us down to 3.9. Was that what you were asking about? Just want to make sure.
My emphasis was with the positions currently approved.
Yeah, from page 1.
I cannot support any additional amendments to
Okay.
further compromise our ending fund balance.
Okay. And so, and so further clarification, just stepping through, because I know this can get confusing, and I know we have people watching too. So the proposed amendment 1 or 2 on the second page that we have would not affect the general fund
Correct.
ending
Yep.
balance percentage or dollars. However, it may affect our ability to do projects at some point.
Correct.
Okay. All right. So then I think I saw Councilmember Ball's hand up first, and then we'll go to Councilmember Kurtz.
Excuse me. Yes, I can't see the logic in saving $150,000 on paying more towards Trailhead. In my opinion, it's not a huge debt. Cities always have a little bit of debt. And by doing so and draining these REIT funds, it's not a good idea just to save $150,000. So I can't support either amendment 1 or 2.
Okay. All right. Now Councilmember Kurtz.
I have 2 follow-up questions to some of the other discussion that happened. The point I raised my hand at, Kyle, was when you said we would have to find other revenue sources. How would we do that?
So the optimistic approach is to get really aggressive with grants and other, so on the state level, potentially national level. One of the potential fears is if that we are so thin with some of our ending balances, and we do have issues like Kramer Parkway come up where that road deteriorated about 5 years or 10 years before we thought it was going to. All of a sudden, we are faced with a potential deficit of projects that then we are potentially either asking to raise taxes, or we are going back out to the market to finance some of those.
Okay. So what I heard was we would need to sort of crowdsource from the government, other governments, or grants.
Yes, and I don't want to paint a overly grim picture, because the hope is that, we can, through internal mechanisms, kind of build these funds back up to cash flow a lot of these capital projects, which we've talked about. That's a priority, is cash flowing these and not financing these. But if we're drawn down so thin, the worry is that we are in that position again in the future.
And we can't plan on hope.
Right. So like the 3 options that I heard were grants, sort of that finding a way and hoping someone will give our city money, raising taxes, so asking our residents to pay additional money, or to take on debt, additional debt, probably at a higher interest rate, I think, now than what we had at the Trailhead when we signed that.
Oddly enough, I did look, we're probably right at or a little above on the current market. So our current note is 4.02%. It's closer to 4.15, I think, right now. So we would hope that is reduced over the next couple of years, but
Right.
it's hard to speculate. So.
So I think the other question that I had was around the the lean 12% that we would be at our ending fund balance, and having a target of 15. I'd like to see the city meet their targets, so that we can continue to operate without going to any of these other options. Do you have any suggestions if we did not do any of these other amendments to reach our 15% thing that we strive for?
So I would be, my judgment is that we're close enough to that history as our guide, we would get to 15% through the normal course of operations throughout the year. So I wouldn't be concerned that we would actually reach that mark with what we have. But the worry is that if we continue to draw down, then yes, we are putting ourselves in a potentially precarious position.
Okay. Councilmember Spencer.
Thank you. I've got a couple of thoughts here. I've given the analogy before, that, we as a city, we're going to pretend that we are a little family that just went out and bought a boat, last year. And, we bought it on credit. We had some cash. We probably could have put a big chunk down, but we saved the cash. We bought the boat on credit. We've been having fun all summer, and we come back, and that truck that we're pulling that boat with is doing just fine. It's doing the job, but we're thinking we'd really like to get a new truck. The driveway's falling apart, and we've got some other expenses. So I think if we look at this seriously, what are our priorities, and what are the underlying premises that we have here? The conversation I've heard so far is we want to do everything that's in here, and then to take it back to that analogy of the family, we're going to send dad or mom to go get another job, rather than maybe we need to live within our means. And so the question becomes, can we really afford a library when we are going to be cutting things close? And really the responsible thing to do is to pay off the loan. So in my opinion, and I brought this up at the last meeting, we have to decide as a city council, what is the most responsible thing we can do in this budget session and in the next budget session to make sure we get out of debt. And if the library is something that we want in the future, then that's something we should start saving for. I also brought up in the last meeting the fact that we promised the citizens that we were going to make an accelerated payment schedule towards Trailhead, and thus far we have not done that. As Mayor Pro Tem Cargill mentioned just a few moments ago, that with proposed Amendment 2, we make some progress toward both, and we do keep our promise that we are going to be making some accelerated payments towards Trailhead. And then we have to determine, as it was brought up earlier, that we need to balance the budget. So then the question becomes, well, where is that money going to come from? And I would propose, as we talk about this, that we need to further reduce that library amount that we've set aside to balance the budget. So that's where we would come up with the difference, and we'll be well within the 15%. Thank you.
Okay. I'm trying to figure out who we haven't heard from yet. Councilmember Kennedy.
Thank you, Mayor. Thanks for the reminder on the microphone. It's easy to forget that. This whole thing is very interesting. There's so many paths to what we're trying to do here. All the paths make me nervous. The three major things that I see is that I hear we have $26 million in items have to be funded over a period of the next few years. And we've got $12 million to do that. So it's not, you don't have to be a math genius to figure out that we don't have enough money to do everything. So that's why we'll stagger some of that. I also look at is that a large amount of dollar would go towards paying off the debt, of which we have a commitment to do that. And I think that's a primary commitment over anything else. But we also have a large expense or debt could be accumulated by adding on a community center library. And you notice there may always say community center library. We have a library, we don't have a community center. I want the community center, and it just happens to need the library attached. So let's be very clear about what we want there. So moving ahead on any of this makes me nervous from a financial standpoint. So I sit here trying to think, what can I do for my vote and the citizens that could get us both without putting us in ridiculous debt? It sounds to me that if we're gonna take any amount of money to pay off Trailhead, which is a logical thing to do, to apply towards that. And we're gonna take off proposed grant that we haven't received yet, but I'm hopefully we will, or donations of what we haven't received yet. I hope that we will. We don't have enough money to build a library anyway. So there's a strong possibility that we're gonna have to go to some of these funds and draw down on additional funds if the library runs over the budget. Which our history is, it's a pretty good idea that it might run over the budget because of inflated costs. So it's a difficult decision to make because I don't think any decision is going to be the total right decision. Thank you.
Okay, we had Councilmember Kurtz next, and we'll go to Mayor Pro Tem.
So I think Mike, Mr. Councilmember Kennedy, I think your comment about paths to what we're trying to do is appropriate because I don't think we're all on the same path. What I just heard Councilmember Spencer say, or my interpretation of it is that we would be saving up money and then we take that money that we're saving up to go do something else. So to me, that's not saving money to do what we want to do. That's just having a savings account that we can do whatever we want with. I think that we can continue to have debt that we are planned and measured about paying off. That doesn't at the same time, our haste to pay it off become a detriment to our ability to pay for our operating expenses for our city. I feel like by continuing to focus on paying off the debt so fast, we're going to be in a situation where we're going to have to go into debt because we paid off the debt too fast. And that is my worry. My other worry is that I still have this sense based on what people are saying tonight and at the last meeting, that by doing all of these things, we are not going to have enough money for a library, no matter what we do. A library, a community center, whatever it is. I feel like there is a strategic plan to get money to be paid off, to go all these other places. And at the end of the day, they'll be like, well, we don't have the money and we're not going into debt, so we're not going to have a library. That is how I feel things are headed. I really do not want to see the city below the 15%, but if Kyle says it's fine, based on his knowledge and his experience, I'm okay with that, but I'm not okay with the other amendments. I think that there are too many unintended consequences of making an action like that in a rush to pay off something. I appreciate wanting to pay it off. I think we can pay off a little bit extra every year. And if we do have some unanticipated income somewhere, or revenue, then we can add it to that. But the idea that if we are so lean that we would then have to rely on grants, raising taxes, or financing our operating expenses is very short-sighted. And I don't think that if we are going to have citizen input at the next meeting, I don't know that our citizens are going to be in favor of that either.
Yeah, and just to your real quick point before we move on to Mayor Pro Tem, we can't finance operating expenses. It's not allowed by law. So
Thank you.
you're welcome. Mayor Pro Tem.
Well, I'm a little bit astonished by the conversation that we're having tonight because I'm glad I kept this, because when this came out, I think it was late October, we looked through it, and I believe, I think I was one of the only ones on the dais that was a little bit concerned that that number was 3.9. And now we're in a situation where Kyle's coming to us and saying, hey, this number is going to be, guess what? 3.9. And now we're concerned that the 3.9 isn't enough, even though it's the same number, almost identical, difference is about 60,000, that we were discussing just about a month ago. And no one really batted an eye at that. The other thing I would point out is that, there's a lot of talk about how either proposed amendment number 1 or 2 is going to really drain our funds. That is a word that's been used, drain the funds. I hope everyone has their budget binder with them. if you can go to page 89 in your budget binder, what was proposed was an ending fund balance in the REIT of 1.634 million. Proposed amendment number 1, ending fund balance, 1.634 million. It's the same thing. So the conversation tonight isn't about, at least not to me, it's not about are we draining our funds? It's about where those funds are going. So let's have the real conversation, which is, okay, we don't want the extra 500,000 to go to Trailhead. We want it all to go to the library, or we don't want this particular proposal or that particular proposal. Because I'm having a hard time tracking this because it's the same number that is actually in the budget under proposed amendment number 1. And it's this almost the identical number that Kyle gave us in terms of the ending fund balance for the general fund just about a month and a half ago that we weren't that upset about. And part of the reason is because Kyle explained at that time, just as he explains tonight, that he thinks it's going to improve from there, that we're not going to face a challenge. I too have a concern. I have a concern with an ending fund balance that is 30% of the general fund, let alone 12 or 15 or 10 or whatever number we're talking about. But at the same time, I trust what Kyle's saying, and if he says, we'll be able to make that up, then I feel like that's fine. But I really just think we should have an honest conversation about what we're talking about here and the numbers that we've already looked at.
Thank you. All right, let's make sure I've got, Councilmember Ball, go ahead.
Okay, back to the debt on Trailhead, to Councilmember Spencer's analogy. We're not proposing another loan by not paying off, you're talking about the truck. Now they're gonna need a new truck. They're gonna need another loan. No, we're not saying that. We're just saying not to drain whatever budget to pay off more on Trailhead. That way we'll have some money to perhaps do a library, which, and I've reiterated this many times before, that this body needs to focus on listening to the people and what matters to them. What matters to them right now is to have an expanded library. They're not coming out with pitchforks and torches asking us to pay off Trailhead. So I just don't see the point in the hysteria over one debt.
Thank you. Next, I think I had Councilmember Kennedy first and then Councilmember Van Orman.
Thank you, Mayor. I love your analogy. Pitchforks and everything after us. Well, they're not coming out after us on the Trailhead or paying off the Trailhead also, or either of those. So we can put that aside. On it, I find it interesting, and I caution, be careful what we wish for. Because I hear this a lot. It's thrown out so quickly in this group and the citizens, is that we need to do with the citizens. This is what they're telling us. The only way we're ever going to find out what the citizens want, but we got to give it to them to a vote. Okay? Because 50 people come in here or 100, I respect every one of them as long as they're taxpayers and give their opinion because I take it very seriously. But that is by no way and means tells me what the 12,000 people want in the city. So be careful, citizens and council, what you wish. If you really want to know what the people want, then it goes to a vote.
All right, next we have Councilmember Van Orman.
Thank you. Taught Dave Ramsey so many years and makes it really difficult to know that we have a debt that we need to pay for. But yet we're willing to go ahead and throw a huge sum in a direction that we're not going to be ready for next year. I do believe that we need to have a sinking fund, and that should be preserved for the library. Those other two areas that we're setting aside, they're still going to be part of the libraries. That's how it's going to get paid for. It's not going anywhere. It just isn't in the budget right now because we haven't received it. I honestly look at proposement for either Amendment 1 or Amendment 2 to put extra funds in there and actually save $150,000 in interest. Honey, that's an extra person.
Are you talking
know,
about? Yeah, can we, don't
don't-
use that word.
Don't call me
It's not
honey, please.
appropriate.
So
It's
in any
derogatory.
event, $150,000 for saving for another person in our budget is well worth it. And I apologize for using honey. I thought that was actually kind of nice.
It's very derogatory in the setting. All right, any next questions? Councilmember Spencer.
Yeah, and I'll just clarify, I'm not talking about in that analogy that we're gonna go get a loan for that truck. I'm saying we've got cash to throw
We've got
towards
cash to
the
throw
boats. We've got cash to throw towards the driveway and many other expenses we have as a family. And I'm saying we don't throw it at a new truck because the truck's working just fine. To council, to Mayor Pro Tem Cargill's comments, if we're gonna have an honest conversation, the fact is, we're talking about tonight whether we're going to buy a library ahead of something else that we need in the city. And I don't believe that the library rises to the top of the list. So that's why I'm saying we should focus on paying down this debt. That's something that we've promised. We don't have a way of knowing right at this moment what the citizens truly want unless we send it to a vote. We could do that as well. So we've got options on the table. But at the end of the day, I think the most responsible thing for us to be focusing on right now is paying down that debt that we've incurred on behalf of the city. And then, of course, as we look at, I'm always in favor of a balanced budget. So if that's going to bring the library capital fund down even further so we can balance that budget, I would be in favor of that as well.
All right, I saw two go up at once, so make sure we've got, Councilmember Dunn, we have not heard from you this round.
I want to try and reemphasize that to draw down the city's cash balances is a dangerous position. And to extrapolate on an analogy I've heard used tonight, which I've got to be direct, I think it's dangerous and irresponsible to compare your personal financial situation to the operations of a city on many levels. The length, I'll call it the lifespan, the resources, and the responsibility. Not the least of which is it implies that the people of our community are our children. To be clear, we are their servants. But to extrapolate that analogy, it wasn't that we needed a new truck. It's the truck's transmission just failed and dad lost his job. We have no choices now. We've given away all the money in debt. We're going to now have to start selling things. So in my opinion, to extend that analogy, it does not account for what are real and material hazards that lie in front of the city.
Thank you. So I got through all seven. I saw two hands go up at one time. So I don't know who's first. Fine,
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Oh, this is just a minor thing, but I have also thought of this, that if we don't go forward with the library and the church moves out in April, as they're planning to, we're going to be sitting on an empty building. Empty buildings are not good at all. They tend to deteriorate, and we're going to be paying for maintenance still, utilities, any repairs that need done. There is nothing good about a vacant building at all. And I know this from my experience in real estate. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem.
So again, two comments. I just want to make sure that we are not confusing things because I think things are getting a little bit cross here. The general fund number that we're dealing with is the 3.9. That is the same number that was presented to us a month ago in this. And if you'd like, I can toss it around.
That's 187, right? Page.
I'm not sure what page it is in the budget. I just have it as the separate handout that.
Yeah.
167 is the
Yeah.
actual.
So again, 3.9 versus 3.9. That hasn't really changed. The second thing, I hope everyone will look at the proposed amendments and the great work that Kyle did here. The resources going to the library under proposed amendment number 1 is $3.792 million. The resources going to the library under proposed amendment number 2 is $3.792 million. It's the same amount. whether we're talking about either amendment. So if you take that 3.792 and you add it to all the other dollars that we have already in the library fund and what we're hoping to get with the grant and what we're hoping to get in donations, we are about $500,000, give or take, away from the number that we wanted to be at. Without draining the city resources, without getting below $1 million in REIT, we'd still have 1.2 million left over in REIT. 1.1, I beg your pardon, left over in REIT. We do all the things that we want to do. And then that gets us in a position where we come back next year and we say, okay, are we going to proceed with the building that we bought? And if we are, we have hopefully $5.2 million with those grants and the donations to proceed with that. And if we're not, and we decide to sell the building or do whatever we're going to do with it, then we can put that money again toward the library. And let's say we do something at Town Square and it's a library / community center and we decide to sell the building and we get $4 million for it at $3.5 million. We could take that money, put it toward the library. Now we've got $9 million for a community center / library. So I just want to be sure the community understands what we're talking about here tonight. We are not talking about, as some of the other council members have said, choosing either or. We're talking about the best path forward for trying to accomplish paying off some of the debt, as well as leaving some money in the kitty, so to speak, for the library, which is what I think a majority of the council wants to do. So thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Kurtz.
What I've heard so far, I think Mayor Pro Tem, you were more in favor of Amendment 2, though, is what I heard earlier. So we're
Correct,
talking
yeah.
about Amendment 1. So, I mean, if you do the math on votes, I don't know about Amendment 1. So I think we're really talking about Amendment 2. And I think the reason we're talking about either or is because Councilmember Spencer just said he wanted to pay off Trailhead and not worry about the library. So I think that's why people are having this discussion about either or. I can see the numbers here too about where things are going. But I think at the end of the day, we have to take the context here, in my opinion. And I think that's why this discussion has gotten, I think you used the word crossed. Because every December for the last 2 years, we've talked about the library. This is the third year we've talked about the library. And we've tried to get to the middle. We didn't get there. We tried to get to yes in July. We didn't get there either. So I don't know how on the third or however many times we've talked about the library, we're actually going to fund the library. I think there have been things thrown out tonight about Trailhead and about selling the building and all of these things. And we don't have any of the information on any of that to make any of those decisions tonight. But we're going to go ahead and move the money around tonight. So I think that's why some of that's coming up tonight. I don't know that the current makeup of the council wants to fund a library. And I think that's what I'm having a hard time with. And at this point, I don't have any way to prevent the vote or to impact the vote. And I'm just disappointed that the citizens will have the opportunity to speak at our next meeting when things are pretty much done, and we won't listen to them.
All right. Councilmember Kennedy.
Kyle, reconfirm for me. We've been down so many paths, I've forgotten which one I'm on at this point. Between 1 and 2, the $500,000, I understand what Mayor Pro Tem is saying, that the balance for the library is the same in both. In proposed amendment 2, is $500,000. That $500,000 is just coming out of 338, correct? Or Fund 310?
Fund 310. So we're drawing that balance down from 1.6 million to 1.1.
Right. What normally would that 500,000, if it was staying there, what normally would that be earmarked for?
REIT 1 is, I think we've targeted historically horizontal infrastructure, so street improvements, any number of street and transportation related improvements.
Very good, thank you.
Anybody else? I've got a I want to jump in with this, just a couple things, but I don't want to take away from you guys who are voting. Mayor Pro Tem.
Just one more quick comment, and I know we're not to proposed amendment number 3, but proposed amendment number 3, if 1 or 2 is approved by the council, amendment number 3 puts another $250,000-ish into the library. So again, I think it's important to look at this holistically, and let's just say for the sake of argument that we did proposed amendment number 2, and then also approved proposed amendment number 3, we'd be looking at $4 million. So again, you start adding on the grant, adding on the donations, you're right back up to where we were to start with, give or take a couple $100,000.
Councilmember Kurtz.
I think the only hiccup in that would be that if we don't do something with the library, which is what I heard Councilmember Van Orman say, in the next year, we lose the grant. So I don't think we should be counting on that money at all because it doesn't look like we're going to be able to capitalize on it.
I think it's 2026.
So the project completion would have to be June 30th of 2027. That's the window in which we would have to utilize the grant funds.
Can I ask?
Yes, yeah.
It's a matching grant, though, don't we have to, I mean, we
We already
invested
put the
with the
money
money
in.
in the building.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
and that was one of the stipulations going into it that we wanted to take advantage of, is that we had essentially prepaid the match through the purchase of the building.
If we were to sell the building, though?
The grant's only for that project at that building.
Correct. We wouldn't be able to use the grant on a library project other than at that facility.
Thank you.
But we could reapply.
Absolutely.
Okay. I think I saw, Councilmember Ball, did you have your hand up? 'Cause I think I saw yours before.
Oh, no, I was just,
Oh, okay.
I was gonna say-
Councilmember Van Orman.
Thank you. But the matching, if we had a sinking fund, those matching funds could also go for if we applied for a grant again. Is that correct?
In the future, yes, sure.
Okay,
It would have to come from some source.
right.
It could come from a fund that had been established, yes.
Well, and I would personally, if I was on that committee and I voted to award Liberty Lake $937,000 for a project that was ready to go, supposedly, ready to go. And it didn't happen, my chances of voting yes again are going to go down. Just my personal thought. Councilmember Ball.
actually, a question for either you or Kyle. What is a sinking fund? Is it like it's like
Savings.
Savings,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I see your point. Why would they give us another grant?
Okay, so before, I'm not seeing hands right now, just a couple, okay, go ahead.
You know, the other thing, I think we need to consider, if we go to page 98 to the library capital funds resources. We look at this transfer in from the general fund, we're talking about almost $2.5 million that's coming out. So again, I'm gonna go back to the fact that we've got cash that we could be putting towards something, or we could leave it in the general fund. But instead, we're saying, we gotta take this out. And at the same time, that's gonna leave us really skinny. We're doing it to ourselves, if we're being honest with ourselves. So if we're saying we really gotta have a library at the expense of running skinny, I don't wanna hear any of this talk about we're gonna have to go heavy on grants and come up with some other funding sources. The funds are sitting here. We don't have to take them out of general fund. To me, that's irresponsible. Because from what I've heard around the dais tonight is we don't want to run skinny. Well, we don't have to. We are doing this to ourselves. If we take 2.427 million out of the general fund to put towards the library capital, we're doing it to ourselves. We're pretending as though somebody's done that to us and now we got to figure out how to come up with a difference. We don't have to. It's sitting right there. We can put it right back in the general fund. Again, we're telling the citizens that it's more important to us to have something newer than what we've already got. Because the way I've heard it kind of described, it's almost as though we don't even have a library. We do have a library. It's functioning very well. Those who are using the library often, they're enjoying it. The numbers are great. Things are going really well at the library. So we're telling the citizens, yeah, we've got this, but we want something better. And we're willing to go run skinny on the budget in the meantime as a result. We're doing it to ourselves.
Go ahead.
We had an assessment and we're planning for our future use. So we're investing in our future, not saying that it's not working well now, even though I've heard Jandy say some different things about the capacity of the library. So I think that the ability for us to meet the needs of our residents in the next few years is at stake in this discussion as well. And we are doing this to ourselves. If we are going to pay an amount of money that we don't need to pay yet for Trailhead, we are doing this to ourselves. So I totally agree with that statement. I think it just, whether it goes here or there, we're choosing to put money somewhere else and run skinny. That's what we're doing. So I totally agree.
Mayor Pro Tem, and then.
Just a quick follow-up on this. Again, the running skinny in the general fund is different than the proposed amendments that we're talking about here with the read. So I just want to make sure we're clarifying that. But the reason why we're talking about running skinny is two things. One is because of that 2.4 number, but this council already signed off on that when we were talking last week. We went through the budget line by line. We said we were all comfortable with that number. And then this council voted 6-1 to increase the police department budget. That is if we're running skinny, those two things are the reason why we're running skinny in the general fund. Not anything else that we're talking about here with the proposed amendments on REIT. That is completely separate. So we were almost unanimous in the last meeting about increasing the police department funding by $350,000 to $6 million. And I still think we're right on where we need to be with the 3.9 compared to where we were a month and a half ago at 3.9. But if the comments being made that we're running skinny, it's because of that 2.4 number, and it's because of what we did with the police department last week. Thank you.
Okay, and I think I've got Councilmember Kennedy and then now Councilmember Ball.
I just want to make a comment about a comment earlier when it was talked about, we get to the point where we're short on cash, we're gonna have to start selling assets. And Councilman Dunn points that out quite well. You know, we would have to start selling assets, or other council members would certainly consider that. I want you to understand something. We're asking, hopefully, to raise $500,000 in donations. If you sit here tonight and think that's free, then you're in a dreamland. Anybody that's going to come forward likely and donate something, the city is going to ask for something in return. Then maybe the library is named after them, or the building is named after them. And a good example is Trailhead. We built that facility over there to have a room for the citizens, and an organization very well respected in the city came forward with a donation, and now it's a Rotary room. It's no longer the Citizens of Liberty Lake room, but whatever the citizens wanted. So trust me, we're already considering selling assets, and that's going to be the right of what names go on the buildings. And if you think that hasn't already been discussed, you're in a dreamland.
Well, sponsorship opportunities usually do with naming rights for
Absolutely.
a certain period of time. Go ahead, Councilmember Ball.
On the library capital fund, page 98, the 2.4 million-ish that you were just referring to, Council Member Spencer, it includes the grant and the donations.
No, it doesn't.
No, it's separate.
It's a straight transfer out of general fund.
Oh, okay. My bad, sorry. Okay.
All right. Okay, I've been trying to jump in with a couple of things, but go ahead, Councilmember Spencer.
Yeah, and I will just say that what I was mentioning earlier is not a proposal to take that 2.4 and throw it at Trailhead necessarily. I'd love for some of that to go towards it. But the opposite is we're taking 2.4 out of the general fund and it's going to the library. Okay, we're doing that to ourselves. I haven't made any sort of proposal to take 2.4 million and throw it at Trailhead. That hasn't been proposed. That's not an amendment we've been looking at tonight. So we're not comparing apples to apples. I'm saying that those funds should, or at least a portion of those funds should go back into the general fund if we don't want to run skinny. Thank you.
Can I take just a moment, please, just to weigh in? So just a couple points of clarification. Again, my viewpoint, the commitment and the discussion that this council had when we took out the 20-year bond on Trailhead was to pay it off in 10 years, not in 1, not in 2, not in 3, not in 4, not in 5, in 10 years. And we had laid out a plan to do that. This obviously accelerates it, but we're not breaking any promises to our citizens about prepaying this and getting it done early. We're on track based on the plan that was laid out when this all happened to pay it off in half the time, 10 years versus 20. So I want everybody to remember that. I also want to make the comment that cities are not a family. I get wanting to pay cash for a house for your family. Those family members don't change unless you're in my situation right now. But had to make a joke somehow about the whole thing. Those family members don't change. And so the money you're saving as a family to pay for that house will benefit the same members of that family going forward, or some variation thereof with grandkids and things like that. As a city, part of the reason we take out debt for 10, 20 years is because instead of saving $7 million cash for Trailhead is because, the 14,000 people who are here living in this city now are most likely going to change over the next 20 years what the bond was scheduled for, even 10 years. 30%, 40%, 15% are probably going to be different. I mean, we don't know what that number is. There's going to be new members. And so the point of going into debt for things like this, for assets that are going to last 30, 40, 50 years, is so those people who will be using it in the future are the ones paying for it, not the ones who were here paying into it, who are not going to get any benefit. So there are very legitimate reasons for going into debt on projects like that. And great, if we can pay them off 10 years early, even if it's 5 years early, that's great. But the point is spreading that cost over the people who are going to be using the asset, not making the people who had been here before pay into it and not get any benefit. I just want to remind everybody of that. And then, to one of the points that Councilmember Kurtz pointed out with regards to the library, and I'm not going to stay on this long at all. The city paid for a professional company to come in and do an assessment on the library, and their recommendation was a larger space with additional amenities, which is what prompted us looking for the larger space. So this is not a whim of the library director now or in the past. This was a professional assessment that the city paid for and its citizens paid for, and we're trying to fulfill that requirement that this professional company that we paid a lot of money to recommended for us for the future. So those are just the couple comments I wanted to bring up. Okay, Mayor Pro Tem.
So a couple of things. One, I think we could make that same argument about the library, that we could take out debt tomorrow to build a library and make the same argument that, let's make the future folks pay for it. As someone who hopefully wants my kids to stay in the city as long as possible, I don't really feel comfortable with telling my future children, I want this now, but you can pay for it later. To me, that's not really the responsible thing to do. I think that's why the state is in so much trouble financially. I think that's why the federal government is in so much trouble financially. And granted, we are not in trouble at all compared to the state or the federal government. But the point is that it is real easy. It is real easy to come out and say, well, let's take out debt because we want this now. Oh, and tomorrow let's take out debt because we want this. And then the next day, let's take out debt because we want that. I mean, that's a real easy thing to do. And something we could say, we could decide as the council here tonight, let's take out a $10 million bond to build a new library and community center. Let's do it. We've been told by Kyle, the interest rates are lower than what we're paying on Trailhead. So why the heck not? That would solve all of our problems, right? Everybody, we'd get a brand new library. We wouldn't be dealing with these numbers, but I think the majority of the council, in fact, I think everybody sitting around the room here doesn't want to go into future debt to build a library. Why? Because we've got money here. We got money sitting right here where we can make at the very least, a huge down payment on some sort of building, whether it be the current building or the building at Town Square or whatever. And as far as the plan to pay Trailhead in 10 years, I'd like to see that. I wasn't aware that we had a formal plan to pay off Trailhead in 10 years. I know we talked about it, but if we've got a formal plan to pay off Trailhead in 10 years, terrific. I still think that we should try to do as much as we possibly can each and every year until it's paid off. If for no other reason than it saves us money. It saves us money. to the tune of potentially $2.8 million. What could we do with $2.8 million? There's a library right here we're talking about building that could use a little more money. So those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that's had another hand, Councilmember Ball.
Well, that was quite grandiose, but,
Okay, we're not using names. We're not doing any of that tonight, okay?
Okay.
So
Since-
everybody please stop.
okay, since the last meeting, I've had a lot of thoughts about this and anxiety, and I think that what's underlying here is that there are efforts going forward perhaps to just defund the library. That's what I see here. And I just think that's really sad and flies in the face of what the citizens don't want. And I know you don't like me saying that, Mike, but you know, I am concerned about what the citizens want. And I just think it's very sad. This is where we're at.
All right, so, I was going to, go ahead, Councilmember Spencer, then I was
Thank
gonna.
you. Okay, so just a couple of things that I heard in the mayor's comments here. Mayor Pro Tem Cargill brought this up, 10 years. I mean, I was around when we passed the bond. I know there was talk about a 10-year plan or that we would try and do that, but we saved exactly zero since then. We have made our minimum bond payment. So as far as I can tell, there is no plan and we have not acted on a plan. The mayor brought up an assessment that was done, and that was before my time here on the council. So my question is, what was the plan at that point to build a library other than hopes and dreams? Because we saved how much? We've saved only the amount that we brought in lease payments from the church. That's all we had up until this budget session. That's all we'd saved. There was no plan. So if supposedly there was a plan put in place that, hey, for a future, citizenship here in the city, once upon a time it was going to be 19,000. I think that's going to be a little bit more. We're at 14 now. There was no plan. There was no plan put in place. We did have an opportunity that came up to purchase that building, but that didn't become the plan. It simply was an opportunity that we took advantage of. And now we're looking at that opportunity and determining whether that's still a good idea, but there's still no plan. This year, the idea that we were going to cobble together and empty all the piggy banks in the city and make ourselves run skinny as a budget from the general fund, that we were going to try and pull that off this year in July is just as crazy to me as those who are suggesting that we go ahead and pay off Trailhead right now. The difference is we already had an obligation. We already took the bond. We already are in debt. We don't have to do the library. If we're going to pretend like we have to, based on some sort of assessment that we took no action on, other than point of order, Mayor.
Sorry. Go ahead.
We took no action other than we hired a project manager, which I was against, and we came up with some plans. But other than that, we were going to raid the entire city budget to pay for this in 1 year. Why didn't we do that with Trailhead? Why didn't we raid everything to do that? So again, it goes back to the question of what is the priority of the council?
So, just real quick, so there have been things done with that assessment over the years. There was a motion made, I forgot what year it was now. It's been many years now. I believe Councilmember Kennedy and Dunn were both here, Councilmember Kurtz as well. To put aside $100,000 a year. It wasn't a lot at the time, into a savings account for future library, and the council voted it down, much to my surprise. So just a little bit of sharing that history there. So there have been things done within the library, within the means that they had to accommodate some of the things in that assessment. So it has not been sitting on the shelf. So Councilmember Kurtzen, and we've been on amendments 1 and 2 for over an hour. So I'm going to ask after you speak that there be a motion, Councilmember
Can I make
Kurtzen.
one more comment after?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's what I wanted to say. And Mayor, you said it too, just regarding the savings part. And I think that that's one of the things when we talked, I think a couple meetings ago about being intentional. And maybe perhaps we are not all on the same page with what our intentions are with the library. Because in the past we did vote down saving money for it. And I think it's time to be saving money for it. I absolutely think we do need to be saving money for it if we have any hope of doing it in the future. Because like Mayor Pro Tem said, I don't think any of us want to go into debt. I would cast that vote tonight and I would bet that it would be 7-0. That's my guess. Haven't talked to anybody. But I just don't think that any of us really want to spend all the resources either and put the city in a troublesome spot. But I think that when we bought a building 2 years ago and we're having questions now about our purchase, guys, we're 2 years down the road with this. So I think we do need to have some serious discussions about if not that, then what? But those are things for the new year. And if we go moving money around now, I just worry that once it's put someplace else, it's not going to be available for it at all.
All right, Mayor Pro Tem, and then hopefully we can move on to.
Yeah.
the motion.
For the record, I just want to make sure we're reading these numbers out loud in case people listening have not read the budget. So in 2023, the actual amount of money that we spent on the library was $620,991. This year, it went up to $716,107. Proposed in 2025, it's going up to $753,035.
Of the
No,
operating budget.
correct,
I
of
was-
the
I wasn't
operating.
sure which-
No one made any disagreement with that. We went through it last week. Everybody was just fine with those numbers. And the worst case scenario under all of this increases the amount in the library capital fund from $253,000 in 2023 to $304,000 this year to at least 3.792, if not more, considering the donations and the grant from Commerce. So if the contention is that we are defunding the library, we're doing a really bad job of it because we're increasing it each and every year. And we're talking about putting at least about $4 million in, even if these amendments are approved. So thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem, can you tell me what page you're on, please?
So the municipal library budget on page 69, and that's the general fund budget for operations. And then the library capital fund budget on Fund 330 on page 98.
Or Councilmember Ball didn't have any questions. You good?
No, I
You good?
just
Okay,
like-
no, I was
No,
just making sure. Okay.
yeah, I'd just like to know.
All right, so
Can I make a motion, Mayor?
that's what I was gonna ask.
Make a motion to approve proposed amendment number 2.
Okay, we have a motion on the floor. Do we have a second?
Second.
I have a second from Councilmember Cargill. So I hate to ask this, but any further, very last minute, very short comments? That's the reason I want to do the discussion before the motion. Okay, not hearing any. I'm sure no further discussion. Oh,
Yeah, that's a good question. So,
and I wasn't here, so
so Sean, we tabled those to this meeting. So do we need to?
Let's refresh my memory on the motions.
The initial motion was made to take the library fund transfer number to 1 million even and use the extra 500,000 for another extra payment to Trailhead. That was then a proposed amendment was made to change that motion to take 2 million from REIT 1 and put 1 in the library capital and 1 towards Trailhead payoff.
which is
So
not,
that original motion and amendment were both tabled.
okay,
So that's basically 1 and 2.
That latest amendment is what you see on amendment number 2.
okay. So we're already taking that, so,
Taking consideration, is that right?
So we're-
yeah.
The cadence,
So we're
the
good-
cadence
we're
is
good as
right,
we
yeah.
say.
If, so, and I'm just trying to make sure I understand, the two motions before that were up for consideration
Is your
is,
mic on?
yeah, the two motions that were considered at the last meeting, are those what is amendment number 2? Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, that was the amendment to amendment number 1. So
Yeah.
Mayor Pro Tem Cargill initially made what we see as amendment number 1. Councilmember Spencer then amended Mayor Pro Tem Cargill's motion. And that's what we see as amendment number 2.
So in essence, the motion that Councilmember Spencer just made was already made at the last
Correct.
meeting?
Yes.
Okay, so in essence, we're just then going on that
Taking it back.
secondary motion that Councilmember Spencer had made. at the
Okay, so
last
we're
meeting.
good.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're good. All right, so not hearing any, is your hand up, Councilmember Dunn? Just make sure.
I just want to be really clear. We're looking at the page that was distributed by the finance director that's stated as number 2.
Correct,
And that's the subject of this vote.
correct. Okay, all right, so not hearing any further discussion. Those in favor of approving proposed amendment number 2, please say aye and keep your hands up so I can get keep hands up, please, so I can get them. So I've got 2, got 3. And those opposed? All right, so motion fails. Kelsey, as you get, okay, all right. All right, so,
Mayor,
yes. sir.
can I make a motion
Well,
then?
I just want to make sure, just
Yeah.
keep my notes. So proposed amendment number 2 is now failed. So
So-
that's off the table.
Okay,
Okay,
correct,
yeah,
Number
Yeah.
one.
correct.
so go ahead.
Yeah, so do I need to make it again? Since it's technically still on the floor?
No, you would not. It's because
Okay.
it would be tabled to this next meeting.
Okay, so
Okay.
basically
Still be
it's
on
just
the
to
floor.
approve amendment
Yeah.
1.
Okay.
Correct.
So then we're back to the original motion from the last meeting, correct?
Right.
Which
Yes.
would be to approve proposed amendment number 1. Any further discussion on number 1 before we go to a vote? Well, okay, all right, so those in favor of approving proposed amendment number 1, please say aye and raise your hand so I can get that.
I,
Okay, and those opposed?
Nay.
Okay, so motion passes 4-3. So proposed amendment number 1 has passed. Okay, all right. So being cognizant of the time, we are only noticed tonight till 9 o'clock, so let's speak faster or less on this next one. No offense to anybody. So proposed amendment 3, I will open that up for discussion again before we take a motion. Just a reminder, we did talk a little bit when we first started talking, when I first proposed myself about doing stuff with community messaging. I know there was the discussion about leaving money in there in case we have to repair, so I'd like to just point that back out. And then just a reiteration of the average that we spent out of the building contingency fund over the last 4 years is like 12,000, and we haven't spent it in the last 2 years.
Right.
Okay, so just want to get that out there for clarification. So discussion on proposed amendment number 3. Mayor Pro Tem.
Well, Mayor, you just answered my questions, I
Okay.
think, on this, but just to clarify, and Mark, maybe this is a question for you and your staff. How much would you feel comfortable leaving in 337 for a rainy day, for something that happens with one of the buildings? I mean, 34,000, which is, as the mayor points out, is twice what the average of what we spent. I mean, would an even, if we were to transfer out, would an even $100,000 transfer out be okay?
So to answer that question, with data to support it, we are in the process of being able to do that. I don't know that there's a comfort level at this point without having that analysis done. I can tell you going forward that it needs to be some percentage of the value of the structures that are in the inventory against their age and likelihood of system failure. And we're underway with performing that analysis so we can make this a much more precise figure going forward. But I would say for 2025, I don't know that the methodology that you just described is any better or worse than any other methodology that we've used. So 50,000, 40,000, any of those numbers. To the point that has been made multiple times, not, I don't think at this meeting, but at prior meetings, if something comes up that we have to account for, we can bring an amendment to the council to address it.
Well,
Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I'm not gonna make an amendment right
Yeah.
now, but I would just speak in favor then of transferring 100,000 out of each of those. That way we still have some left over in there for an emergency or whatever we need it for into the library capital fund. That's not an official
Right.
motion. We were gonna take them one by one, but I think that would be a good thing to do.
Yeah,
Second.
and I was just gonna ask Mark, and I can't see who's on, I don't know if Ben's on or not, but when this was put in place, I would, between when this was put in place back when the library roof failed, I forgot how many years ago that was now, it was a while. I would say we're in a much better place for planning and maintenance of our buildings than we were back then. So I think we have a much better knowledge base of what in our acting on those maintenance things that probably would have prevented that. So just again, kind of supporting your comment there. So any other discussion on either of these proposed transfers?
Thank you, Mayor. I have a question.
Yep.
Kyle, the proposed building contingency fund, what's the balance in there now?
134,000.
So that is the total. So we
Yes.
would drain that completely.
That or a portion of, it's anywhere, there's an entire gamut of possibilities. Draw it down to 50,000, take the entire amount, leave 75,000. There's a whole host of possibilities to do.
I would be nervous about draining that down to zero.
Okay, that's Councilmember Kurtz.
I think you might have already said this, Mayor Pro Tem, but did you say, maybe I heard it in my head, taking out 100,000 and leaving 34 in, or did I make? that
Yeah,
up?
I was just gonna do a bulk or an even 100 on both of those. And then that way we leave 9,500 in the community messaging fund in case that sign goes down or we have troubles with it or need to repair it. And then we leave 34,000 in the building contingency fund and then take the remainder and transfer it back to the library.
I'd be okay with that.
All right, any other discussion on those? All right, no, is there any motions that were tabled on this one?
No.
Okay, just want to make sure. Okay, so is there no other discussion on this one? Okay. then
Okay, I'll make a motion then, Mayor, to transfer 100,000 from Community Messaging Fund 335 to the Library Capital Fund.
Okay. Do we have a second?
Second.
And a second by Councilmember Kurtz. Any further discussion on, this is the messaging fund, right? You said?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah,
okay.
335.
On transferring $100,000 from the Community Messaging Fund to the Library Capital Fund. Any further discussion? Right, not hearing any. All of those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, motion passes 7-0.
And then Mayor will make a motion to transfer 100,000 from Building Contingency Fund 337 to the Library Capital Fund 330.
Okay, any-
Second.
got a second from Councilmember Kurtz, I believe that was again?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Did I say 100,000? Okay.
Yes, all right. Any questions or discussion on that motion? Not hearing any. All those in favor of transferring $100,000 from the Building Contingency Fund to the Library Capital Fund, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, motion passes 7-0. All right, see, that was quick. All right, now we're on proposed amendment number 4. So I again open up for discussion.
Well, I'll start out the
Okay.
discussion.
Councilmember Van Orman, go ahead.
As you know, there were 3 picnic tables along with patios put into the Arboretum this last year. Matter of fact, it got finished up at the end of October. They look great, but as a community page so lawfully put out there that the picnic tables look a little hot. They may need a little bit of a shade put over the top of them. Now we had our landscape architect state that it would be approximately 30,000 each. I believe that also included the pavement underneath it though. And when I looked at Google to find out how much bathrooms that the mayor has put out, it was anywhere from 100,000 to 500,000
Yeah, they're
for restrooms. So that's where that $600,000 comes from.
All right, and for, okay, I think I had Councilmember Ball first, then Councilmember Kurtz.
Yeah, I think that this amendment belongs, the discussion belongs in the capital facilities plan when we get to that next year.
Okay, thank you, Councilmember Kurtz.
I was gonna say something similar. I think that we need to be doing this during our planning process. Last year, at the end of the budget season, we approved the tables and everything at the end, but I think that those discussions need to happen throughout the year in the capital facilities planning process. We don't have a proposal in front of us that is to look at to see what it is we'd be buying. We haven't had any community input. We haven't had, that I'm aware of, any community ask for this. And I struggled last year with this, but I struggle also at the last meeting when this was brought up, that we have a council member asking for something that they are a part of. And in my opinion, I believe that's a conflict of interest. And so I think that this needs to go through the proper course of evaluation throughout the year and not be an ask by an individual council member at the end of the year during the budget process.
Thank you. Any other comments? Councilmember Kennedy.
I would like to point out is in the past, I brought this up at least 3 times to do something in that area. And the idealistic thing would have been is to put in covers, put in bathrooms. As I've said this time and time again, people don't realize that's a corridor. That's a corridor of either golf carts or people walking from that entire section of town, that for them to gain access to the restaurants, to the grocery stores, things of that sort there. We are a city that encourages people to get out and walk. We have fabulous trails for that. We have golf carts to do that. And that's what we encourage individuals to do. That's a corridor that we can take 500-700 homes in that area and encourage them to utilize that to come in and use our restaurants, Trailhead Restaurant, if that ever happens. And so I have been speaking in favor of that for quite a while.
Real quick, make sure there's anybody else before we go back around. Mayor Pro Tem.
Can I just ask a couple of follow-ups,
Yeah.
Wendy? So the 600,000, can you break that down for me again? Did you say 100,000 to the covers and then 500 to the back?
Actually, it's 90,000. That would be, and that's overage.
To the
for-
covers.
For covers,
Okay.
for gazebos,
And then the rest is what we're talking about with the restrooms.
correct.
And your thought is that they would just come out of the general fund? The ending fund balance,
At
sorry?
this particular point, yeah, that's where they would come from.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that answer.
Yes.
Okay, Councilmember Kurtz.
So I still feel like we're making a $600,000 ask at the end of the year on something we don't actually have numbers in front of us for. We have not done this in the capital facilities plan. We don't, like, I mean, I'm not trying to be disrespectful, but it's based on a Google search. A $600,000 ask, you guys. I don't think that's reasonable. I don't think it's a reasonable ask to make that sort of a decision. I think if you guys want to look at having a proposal brought forward by the Lions Club, that is a tremendous ask for next year, to have a plan in front of us. So we know how much it costs to install these things, where they would be located. Can we locate them? What does our planning and engineering department think? I think that by putting forward $600,000 tonight, it feels sort of, not planned out.
Councilmember Ball.
And one other thought I had about putting restrooms down there, it's kind of a dark area, at least right now. It's like a big swale. I just see it as a invitation for trouble, people up to no good, hanging around a dark restroom in a dark area. I don't like it.
Councilmember Dunn.
I just want to make sure, a question mark, I was running through the public and park facility set, our PF numbers on the capital facilities plan. I don't think we've got this right now on that, schedule of capital facilities.
It is currently on what previously has been known as the unfunded projects list, which is page 136.
Yeah, I was reviewing the, 9 items previously issued on unfunded. Their UF numbers. Is this one got a UF number?
It's UF 11 and 12.
So I guess I perceive this as not necessarily presented by staff, or I guess observed by council as within the priorities to even put it into a calendar range out to 2029 yet. I'd love to talk about it, but I can't see right now getting it inserted into our budget for 25.
All right, any other comments? Obviously, this, if you look at the resources here, it would further draw down that general fund ending balance, which we've been talking about as well. All right. We haven't heard from Councilmember Spencer, and we'll go back to.
Yeah,
Councilmember
I'm
Kennedy.
not necessarily opposed to looking at this at some point. I do kind of agree that we should probably get some more hard numbers and get all of our ducks in a row. So not necessarily opposed to a project like this, but I think maybe a little bit further down the road.
Thank you. Councilmember Kennedy.
No further comment. Thank you.
Okay. All right, if there's no further comments, I guess we'll ask for a motion if there is one.
Nope, we're gonna wait for that motion for next year.
Sounds good. Wow. It's only 8:35. So, Councilmember Spencer.
Yeah, Mayor, I think in light of the fact that as we sit currently, our budget is not balanced, I would make a motion to remove from that 2.4, gosh, I don't have the number, 2.42728. And considering the proposed amendment 3 that was passed, take the difference from that number to bring us back to balance. So I don't have that exact number at the moment, but taking into consideration of the fact that we just added more funds from proposed amendment 3 into library capital, we are not balanced at the moment. So I would move to make it balanced from that 2.427278.
Can I ask a quick follow-up to that before we have a second? Councilmember Spencer, I think what you're asking for is to change the capital outlay of that number instead of the transfers in, because, and Kyle, correct me if I'm wrong, the issue with the balance has to do with us proposing to spend 5.7 when we really right now have about 4 because we took out several things.
Correct.
All right, so I guess my question is, we don't know what that exact number is yet because Kyle needs to go back and crunch the numbers, right?
Correct.
So do you need a motion from us to take that down, or?
Yeah, so there's 2 potential outcomes here. So there could be a motion to increase the transfer in from general fund to meet the 5.73. There could also be a motion to decrease the expense to meet the current resources as amended tonight.
And the latter was my motion.
Okay, so yeah, I'm still a little confused.
So basically,
Pull from
we've
fund
got to get
balance
that
to reduce
expense
the
number.
expenditure.
We got too many
Yeah,
people
sorry.
talking.
We got to get that expense number in 5.7 down to match what our resources now are in for 330. So this is page 98.
Thank you.
So either you're pulling from resources from the bottom line,
Yeah.
or you're reducing the expense.
Okay, sorry, I'm working through some things here, so. Okay, I got a couple. I think I've got Annie and then Councilmember Dunn, and I know we still have
Yeah, we've got a motion.
motion, but it sounds like there needs to be some clarification before a second. Or,
Yeah.
can you wait until after for discussion? Because it sounds like we just clarified. We had the question to clarify and you
We either
said
have to
yes.
Move more funds into this account, or we have to take some out to balance the budget.
And I
What would that
motion
number
is to take
be,
some out.
Kyle?
So off the top of my head, I hesitate to give you an exact number right now.
Yeah.
It's 5.715228
Right,
is our budgeted expense.
right.
So the motion can be to reduce that budgeted expense to meet the amended resources.
Yeah.
Or it could be increase the general fund interfund transfer to meet the budgeted expense.
Yeah, that definitely sounds like.
So
you were-
hang on. Let me stop everybody before we get too convoluted. There was no second of Jed's motion, so let's let that die if there's no second. And then we can have a motion that Kyle thinks is appropriate relative to which side of a coin, I guess, that the council wants to decide.
Right.
So it sounds like the intent, this is what I was trying, was from Councilmember Spencer, was to reduce the proposed expenses on from page 98 to match what now the funding sources are.
Correct.
Okay. So do you have further clarification, Councilmember Dunn? Or
I was gonna suggest that it is challenging for Kyle to try and introduce this immediately. And I was gonna ask that the finance director and potentially the mayor consider the documentation of that potential amendment for consideration at our next meeting. We recognize that an action must be taken, and I would like the finance director to take some time
see what
to
the
resolve
actual numbers
specifically the
are.
amounts that we're talking about,
Mhm.
and then to prepare what are alternatives to resolve it.
Okay, so.
Is that a motion?
Well,
I
no.
could frame it. I
Well,
was going to
this-
introduce that as a
Here's
concept.
here's my suggestion, step in if I'm overstepping. Since Councilman Spencer made the original motion, would you be amenable to amending your motion to asking for that information to come back? So we have the exact numbers to be discussed.
Point of order, I
Yeah.
think the city attorney said the motion died because it didn't have
Yeah.
a second, so we
Yeah.
could just start fresh.
Right, but would that be, since you're the one who brought the topic up,
Yeah.
since, in order to have concrete numbers for people to discuss and vote on, or would that fit into our schedule? Could we fit it into the schedule?
Yes, we would adopt the budget by reference based on that action
Yeah,
item.
see, I think the intent and what Kyle said in his email to us is that we wanted to have everything pinned down.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So while we can't have that exact number, we know the effect of it. We know the effect is either going to be, we're going to balance by adding more money into that account, or we're going to reduce the expense.
Okay.
So
It's, the number is roughly 1.7 million.
Right.
We reduce expenses to 4,035,728. Or we increase the general fund transfer by roughly 1.7 million.
Oh God, so many hands. I don't even know who was first. I think Councilmember Dunn was first.
I just would conclude my thought in that
Yeah.
the second part of my ask is that we get to a meeting in which there is public comment. I think these are really important actions that deserve the ability for our citizens to be able to comment on it.
Yeah. Well, and that will come at the next meeting before the entire budget is voted on. Okay, well, all right, so who was first over here?
Pretty sure I was.
Okay,
So I guess my question was having the sort of that general ballpark figure helps out with that, but I think, didn't we just make motions to transfer money and now we're gonna make a motion to transfer money out? Like, can we undo what we did?
They're from separate funds, so they're each fulfilling the intent without canceling each other out. Because they're all coming from separate funds,
But they're going in the same one though, right?
potentially, yes.
Right. I think that's my point. I know they're
Okay.
coming from different funds, but we're putting them all in the same place and then we're gonna take the money out and it just like, if we had just put them somewhere else.
So anecdotally, there is a chance that we don't have to do anything with any of this once we realize the potential revenue from commerce and donations.
Councilmember Mayor Pro Tem.
I'm going to make a motion and then I'll speak if it gets a second to the motion. So I'm going to make a motion to have Kyle bring back the finalized budget with the fund uses number matching the fund resources number. Does that work?
Yes.
Second.
Wait, I heard a second?
Yes.
Okay, we have a motion and a second on the floor, and a second by Councilmember Kurtz. Any, hold on, we had, Councilmember Kennedy
No
first.
comment.
You good?
Not
Okay,
good with
Councilmember
that.
Ball.
Well, wait a minute, didn't we still have to,
No, that
There was
died.
no
There
second.
wasn't a second.
that died over there?
Yes,
Okay, so can you repeat this new motion, please?
you said it very well.
These numbers, we're basically making a motion here to make sure the resources number on page 98 matches the
Mhm.
expense number. And so Kyle, when Kyle brings back the finalized budget, those two numbers are going to match
Mhm.
so that everything is kosher in the budget.
Yeah.
And I think the reason why to do this, to Councilmember Dunn's point, is that then it presents the finalized budget for citizen comment at the next meeting. There's not an outstanding amendment here that's potentially going to be approved or not approved. It just is a cleaner way. And then that way, everybody who wants to make a comment on the budget can make a comment on the budget that will be put on our website and included in the packet.
Any further discussion? We do have a motion and a second. Okay, all those in favor of the motion on the floor, I'm not going to restate it again, but I'll probably screw it up. So all those in favor of the motion on the floor, please say aye, raise your hand, hold it up.
All right.
Those opposed, any opposed, not hearing any, motion passes 7-0. Okay, I think we got marching orders. Good discussion tonight. Appreciate it. Is there any We got adjournment, but real quick before we go, or any further comments, looks like Councilmember Kurtz has something.
The only comment I had, and Mark said that he would make this happen for the next meeting, is I would really like to have all of the fun stuff, the awards, whoever's coming first. And so I will be willing to make that motion to amend the rules of procedure to allow for those things to happen before we have citizen comments. So we don't have small children going home, not seeing their parents get their awards.
So
Oh.
we had a conversation
School stuff.
this morning.
Police officers.
Oh,
So we had a conversation this morning. The police chief prefers to hold his recognition to the first meeting in January. However, for the service awards that are non-classified, we could make a motion to move essentially item 7 before item 6 next week to accomplish what you just described. Yeah.
sounds good. All right, any further comments? Before we adjourn, go ahead.
So
Councilmember Paul.
do you have an idea, Mark, of what the agenda looks like besides the budget next Tuesday?
We have several consent items. We have a couple of appointments to board positions. We have some procurement items. We have the recognition. And we have all of the other things that are regularly on the agenda.
Are we revisiting the restaurant?
No.
Hey,
No.
well, at this point, if you guys want to have this conversation, I suggest that you have it outside of the meetings. We're getting outside of the business of the city according to the special meeting.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
All right, we are adjourned. Thanks, everybody, for sticking around.